This video, I'm going to go through the 2021 Specialist Math Exam 2. Firstly, let's talk about the multi-choice questions. The first question is very simple reciprocal function. F of x is 1 over secant 3x plus 3 over 2. We would like to find the number of asymptotes. So what I will do is I will count the zeros of the denominator, which can be done by a CAS calculator. So you can see the nested command here. I put the zeros, secant 3x plus 3 over 2, comma x. And I also provided the domain restriction. So the answer is boy. The next question concerns the implied domain of this composite function, which is cos inverse log e b times x, where b is a positive real number. So basically, you can just use the domain button and make sure when you use it, you have to put a multiplication sign between b and x and type in the function correctly. And don't forget to provide a domain restriction for the parameter b is greater than 0. So you'll find option E is correct answer. Question 3 is another reciprocal function question. And we are looking at y equals to 1 over cosine ax plus 1 squared plus 3. So I would like the local maxima. By the way, grammatically, this is the plural of maximum. So we have many local maximum turning points. Basically, you just need to recognize when the denominator is the smallest, then the reciprocal will be the largest. For example, cosine ax can only take any values between -1 and 1. So taking cosine ax equals to 1 will make this perfect square the smallest, which is a 0. And therefore, you can solve this equation, get ax equals to pi plus 2k pi as a general solution. And therefore, x equals to 1 plus 2k pi divided by a. Notice that this k parameter is an integer. And then you can just get the y coordinate, which is 1 over 3. So option E is the correct answer. And you might want to use some special values of a to look at the specific graphs at a generalized pattern. For example, you might take a equals to 2, a equals to 3, and double check if it works for a certain option. Question 4, well, if you do this complex number of questions by hand, it will be a little bit time consuming. So what I'll do is I recognize z is x plus yi, and I will apply my CAS calculator. In my TI-Nspire, the argument is represented by the command angle, and the top is z times conjugate of z, the bottom is z minus conjugate z. Don't forget the CAS calculator needs to recognize z is x plus yi, so you have to put a given that as a constraint. And don't forget the imaginary z is the y here, so it's a greater than 0 value, therefore you will get a minus half pi. The graph of the circle given by absolute value z minus 2 minus root 3 equals to 1. So the center is 2, comma, root 3. The radius is 1. 4 points on this circle, the maximum value of absolute z is an option. Basically, you need to understand the absolute value z means the distance along the circle to the origin. And I want to get the largest distance at a point on a circle away from the origin. So my approach is to draw a line from the origin and cutting through the circle. When this line cuts through the center of the circle, you are able to get the longest distance, which means once it's cutting through the center, the vertical component is root 3, the horizontal component is 2. And using Pythagoras, you find this hypotenuse root 7. Then, because it's one radius away from the center, continuing from this line, the longest distance will be 1 plus root 7. Similarly, if a question asks you for the minimum value of absolute value z, you can use square root 7 to take away 1, and you will get this point here. In this question, option D is the correct answer. Question 6. A complex number z which is not equal to 0. When you square it, it's a real number. We would like to find the possible values of argument z. Notice this argument is a non-principal argument and we can take any real values. In this case, if you use a polar form, letting z equals to c theta, using the Morse theorem, you get z squared equals to c 2 theta, and that is cosine 2 theta plus I sine 2 theta. Because this result will be a real number, you need to equate the imaginary part to 0, and therefore you solve the tricky equation to get theta equals to k pi over 2. So option A is the correct answer. Question 7 concerns a relation defined parametrically by xt equals to 5 cosine 2t plus 1 and yt equals to 5 sine t minus 1. So basically, this is a pair of parametric equations describing a circle with center at 1, minus 1. And notice the amplitude 5 and 5. It's the radius of the circle. So if you draw a diagram to represent this circle, and you can identify 6 minus 1 and also 1, 4. So basically, it's traveling from the right vertex to the top vertex because it's a circle. The shortest distance along the graph, which is along the circle, is gonna be the quarter of the circumference. So you can just use, let's say, radius times the radian angle here, which gives you a quarter times pi times 10, and that is 5 pi over 2. So option E is the correct answer. Question A is concerning Euler's method with a step size of 0.1 to approximate the y value. And this is your initial value, x equals to 1, y equals to 2. We would like to find the y value when x equals to 1.2. So on your CAS calculator, you can pretty much get the Euler's button, y times sine x, that is your dy dx, comma, independent variable, dependent variable, comma, and in the curly bracket, you indicate the change from the first x value to the last x value you want. Next to the comma, you write down the initial y value, and eventually at the end, you indicate the step size. So the final answer should be C, according to the output matrix. Question 9 wants us to find one derivative that generates a graph having no point of inflection. So my approach is to sketch each antiderivative. Notice that each antiderivative should have a plus c behind, but that's eventually, let's say, a vertical translation, so it doesn't influence the shape of the graph. When I integrate 2 times x minus 3 to the power 3 plus 5, this is the shape you're going to get. Looks like this is a point of inflection here, but you don't, let's say, you actually don't count this one as a point of inflection simply because it has no change of concavity. And if you draw the other graphs, like the antideriving the first one, antideriving the second one, and the third one or the fourth one, you will see clearly change or a clear twist. Of course, you can sub in values near a particular solution to the second derivative equal to 0 and double check if the values change size from negative to positive, from positive to negative, etc. But I think the graphical approach will be the most straightforward one to myself. Well, this is another possible approach. Like if you differentiate option B, you will get a perfect square, which is 6x minus 3 to the power 2. And because this is a repeated factor, near x equals to 3, it doesn't change concavity. F double dash x does not change sign near x equals to 3. That's why it's not a point of inflection. Question 10 is just, usual CAS calculator slope field question. What I will do is I will just test each differential equation, sketch each slope field, and compare with the one on the exam paper. So eventually, if you try option D to sketch that, you will get this diagram fully mapped to the one on the CAS. So here are some screenshots. For example, you need to get a graph page and press menu 3-8 and make sure you have a Y here rather than Y1. Then on the right hand side, you can use the Y and X consistently. By the way, if you click the three dots button here, drag down, change the field resolution to 30 or 40, so you will see the slopes for the slope field more frequently, okay? And then this is the result from CAS calculator. So basically, if you compare closely, yep, that is the most likely answer. Question 11, you need to read through the descriptions, like a group of hikers travels 5 kilometers in the direction south 30 degrees west and then north for 10 kilometers. So drawing a correct diagram is crucial to solve this problem. So basically, from a point, I draw a cross here, north, east, south, west, and then south 30 degrees to west. That means it's 30 degrees here, traveling 5 kilometers. So you can decompose this length 5 kilometers into two components in terms of I and j. You will use some trigonometric ratios here. So the vertical part is -5 times √3/2 j, and the horizontal part is traveling to the left, therefore it's -5 times half I. And from this point on, you just travel by 10 units up, so it's adding 10j. Eventually you add these two red components and the blue components together as, let's say, the final position vector. So you will get option B. Question 12. Notice that you have three vectors in terms of I, j, and x. Theta is the angle between A and B, so you take a dot product between A and B divided by the magnitudes. And phi is the angle between B and C, so you take another dot product between B and C divided by their magnitudes. On the CAS calculator, you can just define the three vectors as three row vectors or column vectors, whichever way you like. And then you just type out a dot p a1 b1 divided by the two norms. Norm means the magnitudes, and multiply by the similar structure, but now it's taking the cosine phi value between b1 and c1. Then eventually you get this expression. And this is my CAS dump. You can see what I'm doing here. So basically option D is the correct answer. Question 13 was a very good conceptual question. The scalar resolute of a vector A in the direction of vector B is -4. That means the vector A and the vector B will form an obtuse angle. If B is -√3i, the vector resolute of A in the direction of B is one of the options. Basically, if you list the equation first, A times dot B hat, A dot B hat is equal to -4. Because B is -√3i, B hat will be the vector B divided by its magnitude. Its magnitude is just √3. Don't double divide a negative here, and then you get a -i. Therefore, the vector resolute will be the scalar resolute multiplied by the unit vector, which gives you -4 times -i, and that's 4i. So this question can be very tricky because they prepared a distractor here. If you didn't treat this B hat properly, you might end up with, let's say, the incorrect answer. By the way, question 14 is not relevant to the current study design from 2023 to 2027, but for historical purposes, I'm still explaining this a little bit briefly. So what the question says is a body of mass 5 kilograms is acted by a net force of F newtons. Well, F equals to ma, the Newton's second law is not in the current study design, but you can still get asked this kind of question. Say they provide you a Vx relation and you apply, let's say, acceleration is v times dv dx. So you take the derivative, but you also need to multiply by v itself. Then, using Newton's second law, you multiply the acceleration by the mass. So you will get 5 times 2 times 3 plus 2x, which is 10 times 3 plus 2x. And eventually you slot in x equals to 2 to get 70 newtons. This question may well be, let's say, just asking for the acceleration for the current study design. So you can see the exam writer provided a distractor 14 here. That is where student forgot to multiply by a mass 5. But in the current study design, you only get asked, let's say, acceleration, especially variable acceleration. So make sure you know the common 4 forms of the acceleration, okay? Question 15 is also not relevant to the current study design. So basically the idea is to decompose the forces and then try to balance each direction. So I'll skip this one. The answer is apple. Question 16 concerns, let's say, 2 inclined planes, one with an angle theta and the other with 2 theta, and some trigonometric identities were involved, as well as resolving the gravitational force into 2 components. And I'll skip this one. The answer is B. Question 17 is probability and statistics, especially the sample mean distribution. So you have bottles of a particular brand of soft drink labeled with a volume. This is the nominal volume of 1.25 liters. The machine is filling the bottles of drink. It delivers a volume that is normally distributed with a mean of 1.26 liter and a standard deviation of 0.01 liter. So we have 6 bottles. We want to have the mean volume of the 6 bottles here to be greater than or equal to at least 1.25 liters. So you just need to use norm CDF, calculating the probability from 1.25 to infinity. Make sure you use the mean value of 1.26. And for the sample mean distribution, the standard deviation needs to be dilated by 1 over root 6, which is sigma divided by n. So you will be able to get option E as the correct answer. Question 18 is a confidence interval question. The scientists investigate the distribution of the masses of fish in a particular river. So the 95% confidence interval from a sample of 100 fish was calculated to be 70.2 to 75.8. So we would like to find the sample mean divided by the population standard deviation. That is x bar divided by sigma. Notice this word population standard deviation. That means the standard deviation of the original distribution. What I did here was I constructed 2 simultaneous equations. X bar is the sample mean and sigma is the population standard deviation. Now, the sample mean subtracting the z-score for 95% confidence interval, that is 1.96, times sigma divided by root n equals to the lower bound. And if you change the minus to plus, that will give you the upper bound. So these two were the ends for confidence interval. And you will get the middle, or the sample mean is 73. Sigma is roughly 14.2857. Then you just need to divide them through to get a 5.1, which is option C. Of course, if you do that by hand, that will be much more time consuming. So just need to know when you need to write down the formula only and then grab your CAS calculator to save a bit time. Question 19, in my opinion, is a slightly more challenging question, but once you carefully read the question a couple of times and peel off the onion, you will see the kernel. So basically, the mean count scale score for a certain assessment task is 25 and the variance is 36. The scores are scaled that the mean score is 30 and the variance is 49. S is the scale score, X is the original score. So the formula is S equals to mx plus n. So this is a linear transformation of one variable to another. And m is greater than 0, n is any real number. So I would like to construct two equations using the mean value from 25 to 30 and the variance 36 to 49. Basically, you write ES is m times EX plus m, which gives you 30 equals to 25m plus m. And notice this is a linear transformation involving a dilation. That's why you need to use variance S equals to m squared variance x plus 0, because the constant has 0 variance. Therefore, the old variance was 36 multiplied by m squared gives you 49. And solve these two equations simultaneously, you'll be able to get m is 7 over 6 and n is 5 over 6. And this is the constructed relation with known constants. And you just need to put in the original score, 32, multiplied by 7 over 6 plus 5 over 6, which is 38, 1 over 6. And it's rounded to 38. Question 20. We have two coffee machines that operates independently of each other. So the time taken for each machine to produce a cup of coffee is normally distributed with a mean of 30 seconds and a standard deviation of 5 seconds. On one particular morning, a cup of coffee is produced from each machine. So one machine produces a cup of coffee, the other machine produces another cup of coffee, and we would like to find the probability that the time taken by each coffee machine to produce one cup of coffee will differ by less than 3 seconds. So I would just name the production time from each machine as x, and it's normally distributed with 35 squared. That's a variance. And notice that these will be identically distributed random variables. So that you have x1, x2, x3. Maybe you have 3 machines, 4 machines, etc., etc. In this case, differ by less than 3 seconds means, okay, one machine could be producing the coffee slightly longer than the other. So let's say the first machine takes a little bit more time than the second. So that's the first case. But it could be the other way around. That's why you could also get x2 minus x1 is slightly less than 3. So whenever you see this phrase differ by or difference less than, you have to treat the difference with an absolute value, which means their difference should lie between minus 3 to 3. Then this difference variable should be another normal distribution. So the mean value is just the difference between 30 and 30, but for the variance, it has to be the sum of two variances. And it's actually 25 plus 25, which is square root of 50 squared. That is the combined variance. And you just use the normal CDF to calculate the probability between minus 3 to 3 with the mean value 0 and a standard deviation 5 root 2. So this answer will be 0.329. I think usually the student, for my experience, would incorrectly treat difference with only one side. So in these type of questions, you do need to take both sides into consideration. And you will see a lot of similar questions in the previous VCAA exams since 2016. So take a look at those examples and you will find a very common strategy to deal with this kind of problem. So I will stop talking for now and I'll take another video to go through the extended response questions. I'll see you in the future. Bye.